Welcome to Stars and Sprouts, a pagan parenting podcast where magic meets motherhood. I'm your host, Cawnawyn Mor, here to explore the sacred, the cyclical, and the soulful path of raising children in rhythm with the earth and stars. Today, we have a special episode with our guest, Aura, a dear friend of mine and experienced birth doula who shares a wealth of insights from her journey as a devout pagan living in the Tacoma, Washington area. Throughout this two-part episode, we'll explore how she integrates her pagan beliefs into nurturing her children, the rituals shaping her parenting journey, and the wisdom she offers fellow pagan mothers preparing for birth. It is so great to have you here, Aura, and we're going to dive into all things that make up this colorful journey of motherhood. How many years now have you been on this journey?
Thank you so much. 16 years now.
So let's dive into first your journey of paganism, witchcraft, and spirituality. How has it started for you? And when did it start? How's it been going? How's it going for you being a witch?
Well, right now it's going great. I'm really loving where I am in my life and where I am in my craft. As far as how long I've been on this journey, I would say ever since I fully understood what religion was, I have considered myself pagan. My mom raised me pagan, but it was mostly kind of under the table pagan. She had us go to a Catholic church because she believed that Catholicism was the closest thing to paganism.
That's hilarious.
Which, I mean, you've got the incense, you've got the goddess worship, you've got like all the saints and everything. So she felt like we would fit in there. And this was in the early 90s. So there certainly wasn't any pagan covens or anything like that for us to attend at the time. And we were limited to what was in our neighborhood. When I was in about third grade, my class did a mythology lesson on Egyptian mythology. I just immediately connected with the gods that my teacher was talking about, and she was referring to them as if they were made up stories, but I immediately started substituting the names for the deities into my Catholic prayers in my head and felt like a deep connection to the goddess Isis and Bast both, and got a statue of Bast in my room and a statue of Isis, and that was I just took off from there.
Are there any other pantheons or deities or other forms of pagan worship that you dove into along the way?
Over the years, it's definitely increased. It was just them for a long time. And then when I was around 16, Pan showed up. And by showed up, I mean like he literally kind of just showed up.
Oh my God, isn't that so Pan?
I guess I did technically invite him, but then he just never left. I asked him for a favor during a spell, and I don't know why I thought to call on Pan, but for some reason that was my thought, even though before then I had never really called on deities in my spell work. He came through in a big way, and I have enjoyed a interesting relationship with him. There have been other deities that didn't answer, that were very much like, nope, we're not interested in working with you. Aphrodite, yeah, she was the one who was like, no, I'm not interested in working with you. It was very clear to me. You know, you don't love everybody you meet right away, so I'm not that surprised that they wouldn't all want to work with little old me.
You know, I'm sure it's like you have work that you're doing with these other deities, right? And so seeing like, okay, she's on this path, that's not going to intersect with a path of working with me right now.
I don't think that I had anything that she was able to help with or that she was interested in, so that just wasn't my path. But later, when I became a mother, I had my son, my studies and my magic kind of went by the wayside for a while because I was a mom and I was dealing with a new baby. And other than praying when I started labor, I did pray to the goddess Bast because she is the goddess of mothers, children's, and parades, interestingly enough. She's also a party goddess, but it's not in the same way of like Pan. It's more in the way of like we can celebrate together as a family and we shouldn't all just be moping around. So I did call out to her, but during my years when my children were young, I was just deep into motherhood and didn't get to explore quite as much. So I just stuck with my deities that I had. later on, Pele came through really strongly. And interestingly, not through me. I did not call her or think about her. But I had two very close people to me. One of them was my mother, who came to me and said, Pele really wants to work with you. You need to connect with her. I set her up a space on my altar with Bast and Isis. Pan, of course, has a space outside because that is where he prefers to be, and the ladies don't want to share a space with a wild goat man. So I wanted to join a coven. That for me was like the next step on my spiritual journey. And it took me a while because I had little kids, so I couldn't just join a coven. I had to wait till my kids were older, because I didn't have any kind of reliable babysitting, and my husband wanted to join the coven with me. He, in his words, to make sure that they weren't scary, creepy people. Eventually settled on one coven, and my mom was able to watch the kids, so I was able to join them for a while. And that did improve my spiritual awareness, not because they had us doing things that were spiritually important, but because I realized the gaps in my knowledge and started diving into my own knowledge even more. I started reading like the Christopher Penczak books and started meditating and doing all these other things that I had never done before. And things got really deep, and that was very exciting. And then later I left and created my own coven.
You lead your own coven now, which is amazing.
Yeah, so I call myself the High Hostess. We do not practice a hierarchical style of coven magic. We're eclectic. I believe that we do much better when we're all working together, when we're on the same level. Nobody is elevated above any one person. At least that's been my personal experience. And it's been really beautiful. We've been together now for 3 years. My mom and I decided to create it together. We have 8 members right now, and the ladies who are with us have been, various ages, various skill levels, but we all have such a great time. It's been just an amazing experience.
So how do you intersect your pagan beliefs and your religion with parenting and being a mother?
I can't take those two things apart because I am very deeply pagan and I have spiritual experiences, and I just could never even conceive of like separating the two. When I became pregnant with my son, like I knew right away, I could feel that he had this like very earthy energy. When I was going into labor with him, of course, I called out to my deities to be there for me and please make sure that this birth goes well, which I'm so glad. I felt their energy when I was getting ready to start pushing. I was really, really tired. It had been a long, long labor. And I was like, I think I'm ready to quit. And I heard them say, no, you've got more work to do. You need to suck it up. We'll help you with the energy and you can get this done. And thankfully, he was able to be born. And when he was born, even though I didn't have time for like big rituals or anything like that, I knew from the beginning that I wanted to incorporate a pagan lifestyle for him so that he would have some culture of his own. While my mom was really pagan and certainly communicated ideas to me and her beliefs, we never did anything pagan together growing up. We just celebrated the standard holidays, and that was the end of that. My mom and I were really close, and she was working like so much and commuting, and I don't know how she would have even done that. So I have nothing against her. She was doing the very best that she could, and I had a great childhood. But for my kids, I was a stay-at-home mom, and I really wanted to incorporate at least a little bit of the pagan holidays with them. I was like taking them on nature walks and talking to them about the earth as kind of a living being rather than just being like this rock that we live on. They even went to nature preschool, which is the closest thing at the time to pagan preschool. It was not a religious preschool at all, but it was very much nature-based play. And my husband and I were so happy they were able to get that start and really understand from a young age the importance of being careful with nature and of also just being out in it. Like, it makes you feel better. And then when they were a little bit older, I would start having them do little rituals with me. And by rituals, I mean like 5 minutes. I'm not talking like complex. Like we might be in a circle and we call out the elements and then we'd put our hands up and say, yay. And then that was it.
Oh, that's so good.
Like, I just wanted to get them understanding the concept of like sometimes we gather in order to celebrate nature, to celebrate the gods. I didn't really talk that much about the gods with them, but I did mention it sometimes. I might point out a statue. I like to read their stories to them. We'd watch things on TV, and you know, when we were watching stories like Frozen or Moana, like I would point out like, oh, there's this goddess and there's that. And one of my favorite princess stories is The Princess and the Frog. That's my favorite. And I love how like they show that you mess around with these like evil deities and then he gets in trouble. But there's also magic that's beneficial. Like the lady who lives in the swamp, she's not evil, even though she looks a little bit creepy, but she's actually like this magical wise woman.
Totally.
And so I loved being able to like point out the differences in that for the kids, and they just ate it up. There are some things that I did a little controversially, according to my friends. We did not do Santa Claus. You would not believe how controversial that is when you have little kids and you decide not to do Santa Claus. And the reason why I didn't want to do that is because I actually do believe in the Fae and these gods and goddesses and spirits and things like that. So it seemed weird to me to make one up and then to blame everything on him. And then to later, when they're older, be like, I was just lying to you.
Right.
Because then, like, how are my kids going to believe me on the other things that I really do truly believe exists? And then they're going to be like, Mom's just ridiculous. But we would do a dark party on Yule every year. And it was so much fun. We adjust it to the age of the child, of course. Like when my kids were really little, it was very, very simple. We just put on some music, danced around the living room. I'd have candles everywhere. We wouldn't have any lights on. That's why we call it a dark party, just the candles. And of course, we use electric candles, especially when the kids were little, so they don't burn the house down. And we'd have the tree lit up, the Yule tree, so that it was just a really beautiful, dark ambiance. And then we'd have cookies and a story. We'd read the story of the Yule fairies, which is online. And then I would tuck them into bed, and that would be that. And over the years, it got a little bit more complicated, but not very much. We've always just kept it really simple. It's just family on Yule with our little dark party. Now that they're older, I would usually do like tarot card readings with them because they don't so much care about hearing stories about the Yule fairy, although sometimes they get nostalgic and want me to read it to them. But it was just a beautiful memory every year to do, and to me more poignant than Christmas. What we would do for Christmas, because we do have family that's not pagan, is we would just open presents. Like Christmas to us was a very secular holiday. Open presents, hang out with some family, and that was the end of that. But Yule, I wanted to kind of separate it from presents. Sometimes I'd give the kids homemade presents on that day, but they knew they weren't going to get like a bunch of toys and knickknacks and whatever else they wanted. On Samhain, we like to practice the ancestor meal. Now, of course, Samhain, my kids want to go trick-or-treating, which, yes, of course, we do that, for sure. So when I mean like ancestor meal, I'm talking really, really quick and small. Like the key is with kids, you got to adjust your expectations. So I would tell a few stories about some people who passed before they were really aware of it, some people from our family. And then we would generally have like a cup and a food set out for the ancestors. And then they would go off and do their trick-or-treating. And you think that they're not paying attention, but I swear later on, these things come back up. And that was another thing, pointing out movies like Coco and The Book of Life. I would say, look, they also do what we do. They pay attention to their ancestors around this time of year. They just call it something different. And look at the ancestors have this afterlife. And if they're paid attention to, then they can kind of help the characters in the movie. And, you know, just pointing out those similarities, it gave them a deeper understanding. Thank you, Disney.
You know, I was going to say, it's so great. There are so many current day forms of media that we can draw on and use as like a great visual now. Because I know when we were growing up, you had like the craft, which you could kind of stretch a little bit and be like, this is similar to a part of religion, but let's maybe not show this to our young kids, right? Where now it's like these very clear family-friendly examples that you can use as like a cornerstone of your faith. Okay, so we have these supportive media examples, which have been great for you as you're rearing your kids. Are there any other specific deities or practices or energies that you also find supportive as your role as a parent, as you're working with them?
Well, as I mentioned before, Bast for me has been very much a constant in my life because she is this like goddess of mothers and children specifically. I felt like she's been very protective of our family. Also, the ancestors, like I can't understate how much they really, at least in my family, want to help. Like they are your ancestors. Like they care about your kids because they are their ancestors. And so I have called upon their help many times and prayed to them. You don't want to just always pray to them. You want to tell them what's going on too. You treat the ancestors like you would a grandma. You don't just show up at grandma's house and ask her to do things constantly. You sit down, you have some cookies, you drink some tea, you tell her what's going on, and then maybe you could ask for help. And that's how I treat the ancestors, and they've been so helpful in showing me some really deep insights about my children that have helped me understand some of the challenging situations that I've had to deal with as a parent. And I've always told my kids too that they can, if they want to, they can reach out to different deities and see if they answer back. I also told them though, if they don't answer back, if you don't hear anything, don't work with that deity. I'm not one of those people that's willing to work with a cold and distant God. That's just not interesting to me.
I feel like we can apply those same rules to like rules in relationships with people too. Like it's all one big lesson here. And I love how you really solidify these holidays, and then you're very open and free about letting them pursue whatever path they want. You're just there to guide them or maybe point them in the right direction, but there's no pushing your kids. I feel like I'm always taking notes from you also. I'm like, wait, how are you doing this? And, it's helped, I'll be honest, to hear that at the beginning for you, because that's, where I am still in my own journey, it's okay to just kind of focus on prayer, right?
Yeah. Like when they're little, maybe something like egg dyeing or something that's kind of fun and appropriate for little ones. But just like with every single project that you're doing with a little one, any kind of project, expect mess, expect them to have about 5 minutes of attention and then want to move on to something else. Unless you have like a really focused child. Sometimes they're really into it and they surprise you, but most of the time I set my expectations really low and it's like, oh, that was fun. Now we're moving on.
So I wanted to ask, how do you navigate sharing your beliefs with others who may not understand or share your pagan practices and may even have like an aversion to them in our community?
What's interesting is when we moved into this recent house, I was able to set up a permanent altar, which I loved. But then I realized now you're really out in front of anybody who comes over this house is going to see like your altar, your deities, everything's there. It's actually right next to the dining room table. So even at like Thanksgiving, they're going to see it. And what I practice is just the whole idea of if they ask about it, I'm going to be totally honest and open. If they don't ask about it, I'm not going to talk about it. Kind of a don't ask, don't tell sort of a thing. But if they do ask, and some of my friends have asked, some of them knew me for years without knowing that I was pagan. And then they were like, oh, I see that you have these deities over here. What's up with that? And I was happy to explain it to them. And they said, oh, okay, that's great. And now they know. And it's never been an issue. I am very blessed that I live in the Pacific Northwest and we are really chill over here. We pretty much accept most anything as long as it's not hurting anybody. So I am very grateful that I do live in a place where it is safe for me to do that. But I haven't had any issues with it. With my kids, They didn't really talk about it. My son never spoke about it. He somehow got this idea that everything needs to be a secret, which I have a feeling is just his personality. I never told him that we need to be secretive about what we do. My daughter would actually, there was one time when she was probably 4 or 5 and she was staying the night over at her grandparents' house, and she wanted to bring her mini altar that she created. She had created an altar out of a piece of cardboard and had put like little stones and drawn on it, and she said, "This is my altar." Oh my God. And she wanted to bring it with her when she went to their house, and I had to stop myself because part of me was like, oh no, we don't like take those things out. But I realized to her, this is like a form of play, and it should be. And why should I tell her not to bring that out just because my in-laws might be slightly uncomfortable with it? They never said anything about it, and that was the end of that. We do occasionally run into situations where my kids don't understand generic cultural biblical references because they didn't grow up hearing those stories. They do not know the story of Noah and the ark. They don't know about Adam and Eve. They don't know those because I just never brought them up. They're not interesting to me. It wasn't that I hid them from them, but it never came up on their shows or what they were watching. So later on, we were watching something on TV, a show where there was an Adam and Eve scene in the very beginning of it. They just kind of went into it that there were naked people in a garden and they were talking to a snake and there was an apple, and my kids were so confused. They were like, "Mom, what are we watching?" They were scandalized, and like I had to pause the show and explain to them, and they were like, "That is such a weird story." And they were like, "Why are they talking to a snake? And what's the big deal about this apple?" And the biggest thing was that they were naked. Like that was like super scandalous to my kids. So even though it's funny because they're pagan, but they decided to be prudy very early on. And they were the ones who told my husband and I, they were like, "We're going to shut the door when we go to the bathroom. And there's no more nakedness in this house." And so my husband and I were like, "Oh, okay, fine."
So do you have any advice for, us young moms that just passed from the maiden into the motherhood era?
I think my biggest advice would be to relax. I guess maybe this is a blessing. Pinterest and Instagram and all of that wasn't really a thing when I was having my kids. So I had no framework for like this beautiful scripted parenthood that apparently people are showing now all the time online. And I do see it, like I'm not completely blind to it, but I also think it's a bunch of nonsense for most of us. I mean, if you want to do those kind of big, beautiful, grand things and take pictures of it, like absolutely, if that feeds your soul. But I would say, please, please be easy on yourself. And if you want to do something by yourself, don't think you have to include your kids in on everything. I actually do most of my ritual work alone. That's my preference. I either do it with my coven or I do it alone. I don't feel comfortable having my kids or even my husband like there when I'm doing deep ritual work. And I don't find it, because I'm an introvert, I do need that time to kind of decompress. So when your kids are really young, you want to just make time for your mental health. And if that means putting everything to the side for a few years, there is nothing wrong with that. It'll come back. You can come back to it. Your tarot cards are not going to explode. The covens you may or may not have wanted to join, if they're not in existence in a couple of years, they probably weren't that great to begin with. So it is totally fine to just put a pin in it for a while. But if you do want to do something metaphysical, there's nothing wrong with doing it by yourself if that's how you prefer to do it. And if you do want to include your children, please do. Do not feel like you're forcing them to do anything. They will not do it if they don't want to. Right. At least that's been my experience. If you have to meditate while you're in the shower because that's the only time that everybody leaves you alone, that's also fine.
Yeah, like having the grace around, it's okay to set my religion aside for a moment. Well, you're kind of in this survival mode. I think what's helpful to realize too, and now with a little bit of time, I see this, but also talking to you and talking to other parents of older kids, it's like you do get time back in a way. It becomes a little easier. to have a shower where you're not watching an infant at the same time when there's no one to help you and you're just like, okay, well, I gotta get clean, you know? So I've been finding that I have these pockets of private time that are coming back. And I think it's worth remembering, even now where I'm at, I'm really starting to see these glimmers of actual opportunity where I'm able to go out with friends and go to a ritual, and I don't have to be the one running it, you know, necessarily, but I can actually participate further in my religious activities when I want to, when I have the capacity to, and those opportunities are coming up for me more. But it really just takes time, because those really, really young infant years, I feel like for me personally, I really struggled with, this is how it's going to be forever. And it's so not, but it goes so fast. But I know that having just been in that feeling, it felt like, when will I ever get the chance again? So I also just want to encourage anybody out there listening who's a new parent, like, it will come. If you're at the very beginning of this journey, you will find the time, and allowing yourself just like the 5 minutes of grace in this survival mode is so important. So I wanted to sort of wrap this up with, like, do you have any resources or recommendations for pagan parents in terms of books or websites or blogs, and anything you've used to deepen the spiritual connection for your children and with your children as they're growing?
There's quite a few that I put together over the years, but many of them maybe weren't like intended specifically for pagan parents. We used to go, to be honest, like we spent a lot of time at the library when the kids were young, and I loved picking up the books on mythology. Like I said, the ones that were fun stories, to me, gave the kids a way to introduce them to these deities, to their general personality. Not saying that I take those stories literally, but it does often give us kernels of their personality, and in just a fun way that they could enjoy. And then, of course, movies and Disney. But I loved Puka Pages, which is generally free. I think they have a book now through Amazon that you can get. And it has every single Sabbath, they come out with like a story, and then there's a little like game, and there's some ideas for a ritual, and it's aimed at youngish children, not super young, but like elementary school age children. And my kids did enjoy reading the Puka Pages for the different Sabbaths. That was fun, and it was a free resource, which was awesome, especially at the time. And then mostly just enjoying the Sabbaths and making them your own. The Circle Round book that I told you about,
yes,
we love.
It's wonderful.
Yeah, that was fun, and the music that went with it was really fun. We love to go to like pagan campouts and stuff like that. So if you have them in your area, and they are all over the country, so I know that they're in like Britain and UK and some places too. So if you find those, many of them are child friendly, and I would encourage you, if your kids aren't too young and don't get up too early in the morning, because we had to put off camping for a few years. Once we were able to bring them back camping when they were around 5 years old, 5 and 3, then it was amazing. It was so much fun to like just have them play with other pagan kids. Like there was activities, even if it's really unorganized, you're still camping and you're just out there with other people who are also pagan, and the kids can talk about things that they may not feel comfortable talking about with regular kids. It was just such a blessing. Even though it was never a consistent group of people, it was nice to just go be with those people for a little while and remember that I'm not the only pagan family in the entire universe.
And also, along the same vein, what are your hopes for the pagan parenting community as a whole and our future?
I really do hope, my biggest hope is that, at least when my kids were young and I spoke to a lot of other pagan parents, they told me that they were not going to tell their kids anything about religion at all. And they weren't going to share any of their practices or beliefs or anything. And I really hope that that is changing, because even at the time, my mom has a saying, and I really always felt like this was true. She said, if you have no religion, she said, you're more likely later on to convert to something that's extreme, because you're kind of a sitting duck. You have like nothing. If you're just this empty vessel of nothing, then anybody can come along and fill it up. I just believe that that's such a disservice to not share anything about what you believe with your children. they're not going to take everything you say and run with it. Some kids may for a while, but many times they will come to their own beliefs and their own conclusions. And most of us pagans are fine with that. I don't know any that are not. And the truth is their child's being influenced all the time, and yet they're still themselves. Like, I am a person who is, cisgendered, and I'm in a monogamous relationship with my husband. Does that mean that my children are going to automatically grow up and do that themselves? No, but I'm not going to hide my relationship from them. I don't tell them that that's what they have to do, but it's just how I live. I also dress in vintage clothing. Do my kids dress in vintage clothing now that they're teenagers? No, not at all. Just share what you're doing with your kids. Even if you never do a ritual with them, you don't have to, that's fine. But if you're doing tarot by yourself or something and they come up upon you, just tell them what's going on at least. Whatever it is that you believe. If you are just earth-based, if you believe in nothing, if you believe the gods are just archetypes, that's fine too. Just tell them what you believe so that they can think about it. That's part of our job as parents, is to educate our kids. And by educate, I don't mean make them think something, but I want them to be at least exposed to it. I want to expose them to my paganism so that they know that that is a thing. And then they can go out in the world and expose themselves to other things and decide what they think about it. So far, both of my kids are still pagan, but they are very different pagan than me. And it's fine.
Well, thank you so much, Aura. How can people find out more about you, about Wild Root Coven, as well as I wanted to highlight your beautiful work, which I've used every year now from Wild Root Press. Where can people find you?
I am not that great about updating my Instagram page, but we are on Instagram at Wild Root Coven. And I also have a website, www.wildrootcoven.com. And that's where you will find out more about my coven. It is located in Tacoma, Washington, and we are a local coven. We don't do anything online, but I always welcome any questions. If you have questions about paganism or pagan parenting, or if you want to know about starting your own coven, I also encourage people to do that. I am not all about that gatekeeper nonsense about only this or that degree can start a coven. I just think that that's a load of nonsense. If you want to and have any questions, I am happy to sit down and talk with you. I also have my planner, the Working Witches Planner, which is available on Amazon. My planner is for witches who have a busy lifestyle and cannot be confined to the teeny weeny little witch planners that are mostly on the market. I needed a planner that didn't have tiny little boxes to write my life into because I have teenagers, I have a husband, I have multiple businesses. I cannot fit my life into a 1-by-1 box in a calendar. So I created my planner because I also wanted to have a space for tarot spreads. I have monthly tarot spreads in there. There's some basic astrology. It notes the full moons, the new moons, the eclipses, but it's large enough that you can write in everything you need to write. There's like to-do lists on the side. There's a habit tracker. It's made for practical witches, but the practical witches planner was already taken.
Personally, I love working with your planner. It is so great. I love that it's got the astrology right there. I've totally used it to plan out my whole week, and I love how much room you provide. That's so nice. But it's not overwhelming, right? I really appreciate that I don't feel pressured into doing a daily tarot. Not that other planners are doing that, but just it feels very practical, like you said. I can fit it into my day to work with this, and it's a useful tool as well as kind of a meditative spiritual guide for me, where I can just kind of tap back into that world as a parent and feel connected to something bigger than just what my to-do list is. I'm also keeping these things in mind because we're well-rounded, full people. And so anyway, I so appreciate your planner, and I wanted to highlight that. So Aura, it has been Lovely talking with you this afternoon about all things pagan parenting as well as Wild Root Coven. But I'm so excited to say in our next episode, we're going to dive into your work as a doula in the Tacoma, Washington area. So for any of you out there who are new mothers or going to be new mothers, or even just thinking about becoming a pagan parent right now, or also fathers listening, partners listening, significant others listening, whoever out there, right, is listening, I cannot wait for you guys to hear Aura's fabulous insights into all things into the world of being a doula, childbirth, what an incredible passage of transformation this is that we all go through when we're having children. It's amazing. It's profound. So join us for part 2. We're going to shift our focus to her role as a doula and explore how Aura channels her pagan spirituality into her support for mothers through childbirth, as well as birth partners and the whole family. So stay tuned as we continue this enriching conversation. Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Stars and Sprouts. New episodes bloom with the wheel every Sabbath and in between. To explore more of my music, astrology, and magic, and more, visit CawnawynMor.com. And until next time, keep growing wild, rooted, and radiant.